All right, quick question this morning. Did anybody in the last 7 days have an experience that was more difficult than it should have been? You can just raise your hand right now. If this is that moment, I apologize. But just anything that happened in the last 7 days that was more difficult than it should have been. I think those kind of things can be so frustrating because we just put them on our to-do list and say, that ought to take about 15 minutes, that ought to take 30 seconds, that ought to take about 30 minutes. And then something unfolds and unpacks inside of that just gets more and more difficult by the moment. And you're pulling your hair out and saying, how did life get this difficult? Sometimes we can be frustrated because there are things that should just be moving, some things that should just be happening that are grinding and stuck and just not moving at all. Hey, in fact, just to make a quick jump here to our spiritual lives, we've had this experience, haven't we? We have some frustration that my spiritual life, my walk with God, is not just rolling downhill, picking up steam all of the time. Hey, you're like, man, I don't know why that my walk with God, my worship, my prayer time, my just being obedient to Him, my just feeling God's presence around me, I don't understand why that just seems to be hard and uphill. We can kind of wonder about that same question about our church in general. We can kind of wonder, why isn't it just all falling into place for us? You know, we have so many different resources. We have so many different reasons why everything should just be working. Whether it be your personal faith in Jesus Christ or whether it be the ministry of our church at large, we have the truth. We have the message of Jesus Christ that is the perfect, complete, great truth. We have the indwelling of the Holy Spirit inside of our lives. We have 2,000 years of history as a church. We have resources that surround us in every direction. We have Bibles in our car, in our house, probably in our purse. We have all kinds of apps on our phone. We have Christian books that surround us all of the time. You probably have 2 or 3 Christian radio stations preset into your car or radio. You have the internet that is at your fingertips. We have so many resources. There's hardly a time whether you're more than 2 or 3 miles from a church at any point. So why doesn't it feel like everything's just rolling downhill, picking up steam, everything falling into place? There may be multiple reasons for that, but I want us to pay a little bit of attention this morning to the reality of opposition, to the reality of friction and pushback and a fight against our faith, against our church, or against our own walk with God. We're going to take a look at Acts chapter 4 in just a moment. And what we see here in these opening chapters of the book of Acts is we see a church that is rolling downhill, picking up steam. Everything is falling in place. The Spirit moves. They stand up and preach. They have thousands of people who come and say, I want to be a follower of Jesus. I want a brand new life in Jesus. People get healed. More thousands of people respond. It is a church that is rolling downhill, picking up steam, everything falling into place. And then we arrive at Acts chapter 4. And for the first time, the church has to deal with friction. The first time the church has to deal with opposition. The first time there's the opportunity for the church to kind of get bogged down in this moment. And a large part of that we're going to see in the text comes from opposition. We do not have the privilege of living our faith or being a church that exists without opposition. Let's take a look at Acts chapter 4. Acts chapter 4, as we deal with the friction of opposition. It says, and as they were speaking, that's Peter and John, who had just healed the man moments ago. As they were speaking to the people, the priests and the captain of the temple and the Sadducees came upon them, greatly annoyed because they were teaching the people and proclaiming in Jesus the resurrection from the dead. And they arrested them and put them in custody until the next day, for it was already evening. But many of those who had heard the word believed, and the number of men came to about 5,000. On the next day, their rulers and elders and scribes gathered together in Jerusalem with Annas, the high priest, and Caiaphas, and John, and Alexander, and all who were of the high priestly family. And when they had set them, that's Peter and John, in their midst, they inquired, by what power and by what name did you do this? Then Peter, filled with the Holy Spirit, said to them, rulers of the people and elders, if we are being examined today concerning to a good deed done to a crippled man, by what means this man has been healed, let it be known to all of you and to all of the people of Israel, but by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom you crucified, whom God raised from the dead, by him this man is standing before you well. This Jesus is the stone that was rejected by you, the builders, which had become the cornerstone. And there is salvation in no one else. For there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. It's a good verse, isn't it? Now when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were uneducated, common men, they were astonished, and they recognized that they had been with Jesus. But seeing the man who had been healed standing beside them, they had nothing to say in opposition. But when they had commanded them to leave the council, they conferred with one another, saying, what shall we do with these men? For that a notable sign has been performed through them is evident to all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and we cannot deny it. But in order that it might not spread any further among the people, let us warn them to speak to no more of anyone in this name. So they called them in and charged them not to speak or to teach at all in the name of Jesus. But Peter and John answered them, whether it is right in the sight of God to listen to you rather than to God, you must judge. For we cannot speak but of what we have seen and heard. And when they had further threatened them, they let them go, finding no way to punish them because of the people, for all were praising God for what had happened. For the man on whom this sign of healing was performed was more than 40 years old. And when they were released, they went to their friends and reported that the chief priests and the elders had said to them. And when they heard of it, they lifted up their voices together to God and said, Sovereign Lord, who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and everything in it, who through the mouth of our father David, your servant, said by the Holy Spirit, why do the Gentiles rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers were gathered together against the Lord and against his anointed. For truly in this city they were gathered together against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, along with the Gentiles and the people of Israel, to do whatever your hand and your plan was predestined to take place. And now, Lord, look upon their threats and grant to your servants to continue to speak your word with all boldness. Our Heavenly Father, I ask that you, Lord, I pray that you would speak to each one of us the exact word that we need to hear, understand, and do this morning. We pray this in your name. Amen. I want to take some time thinking about opposition. Here's the story. Peter and John go into the temple. They see the man who's lame. He asks for money. They say, we don't have any money, but in the name of Jesus Christ, stand up and walk. And he jumps to his feet. He leaps. He dances. He praises Jesus. They preach a sermon to all the people that are gathered. And then it says that the chief priests And the Sadducees and the leaders were greatly annoyed. They were annoyed because the message of Jesus embarrasses them, because they had stood opposed to Jesus. They were annoyed because the message of Jesus, if it's true, demands a change on your life. And they, at this moment, were not ready to make that change. It annoys them because there is a battle for who's in charge. And so all of a sudden, from everything rolling downhill, picking up speed, falling into place, if it were modern day, they would feel the cold steel of handcuffs behind their back, carted to jail, and dragged before the powers of authority. And what we have here is a very unhappy reunion. You may have noticed that some of those names seemed familiar when we read it. Annas and Caiaphas and the Sadducees and the priests. The reason why those names are familiar is because it was only weeks prior that that same gathering of people gathered to try Jesus. They had Jesus arrested. They brought false charges against him. The disciples stood on the outside of that, trying to lean in to hear, but stay far enough away so that they wouldn't be caught up in the trial that was going on. And now Peter and John find themselves in the center of that room, the very same room where Jesus was condemned to execution, the very same people as judge and jury that had executed Jesus. They had stayed on the outside to avoid this, and now they are in the middle of it. It's opposition. I want you to know that every believer in Christ is going to face opposition of some type. Opposition comes in several different forms. One of the ways in which opposition comes is similar to what we see here in the chapter. It is the opposition from authority, the opposition from government. Now, we need to understand that there are some people on this Lord's Day in various places around the world that are meeting in secret because there is too much persecution and opposition for them to stand up and say, everyone that follows Jesus, come with me. They meet in darkness. They meet in hidden places. They meet quietly. There's no praise and worship time because they can't make that kind of noise. And there are people that it is quite possible that are going to lose their life today because of opposition, because of their following of Jesus. Now, one of the things that we should arise every single day and give thanks for is that we live in the nation that we live in. We do not face that kind of opposition. Now, the truth of it is that government does sometimes put restrictions on our life. There are certain places, there are certain times where some of our liberty is restricted. Sometimes we would like to have more access to preach or teach or pray in places. We talk about the fact that our schools, we're not allowed to pray in schools and those kinds of things. But I want to tell you that really when you take a look at the picture, at its worst, our government places on us inconveniences, not true persecution. And in fact, if you cannot pray in school, that means that you cannot pray out loud. You can still pray at your lunch table, at your desk, anytime that you want. Teachers can still gather someplace, maybe off-site, and pray. And in the reality is in our own community, there's almost no structural opposition to the speaking of our faith in any place, from our schools to our mayor, to our police chief, to any place. Those people of influence stand behind our freedom. In fact, the truth is, I don't think that any of us can name a single American today that is in prison because of preaching the gospel. Now, if you preach the gospel and don't pay your taxes, it's a little questionable. But purely for preaching the gospel, I don't know of a single person that has been in prison because of their freedom to speak the word of Jesus. So really for us, most of the time, we don't have government opposition. Sometimes we have government inconvenience. But we have far more freedom than we have opposition. But that's not the only place where we find opposition. We have also social opposition. Now, for some of you, you have experienced this far more firsthand, and it has at times risen to sharp difficulty in your life. Then you began to share with your family or your friends, your co-workers, about the difference that Jesus makes in your life. Some of you have known what it feels like to have strict opposition, sharp opposition to that in your life. For some of you, it has even broken relationships. I pray that some of those relationships have healed in time, but for some of you know what it's like, that when you said yes to Jesus, it broke a social relationship, whether it be a circle of friends, sometimes family members, even the people who work with you that just don't get it, and you've experienced some of the sharpness of that opposition. But I would also tell you, in addition to that sharp social opposition, there's a subtle social opposition. Do you ever notice that when it's time at somebody's house or a workplace or wherever to sing happy birthday, that the beginning of happy birthday is one of the most miserable things that have ever happened in history? It's not that the song happy birthday is that difficult to sing. It is because everyone else in the room is looking for a cue from somebody else. Okay, how committed are we to happy birthday here? I mean, are we singing this at the top of our lungs, or are we just going to mumble our way through it? Just how serious is everyone else going to take happy birthday? Because I don't want to come in like Placido Domingo on happy birthday when everyone else is like, happy birthday. So what we do is everybody in the room is looking to say, how committed is the next person to this? Because none of us want to stick out. It's the same thing in what we wear. We all want to have our own sense of style with what we wear. We all want to wear something different and kind of have our own look. But I'm going to say across the room that I don't see any bell bottoms. I don't see any ruffled tuxedo shirts. And man, I'm ashamed, but I don't see any hammer pants. Remember the big hammer pants? Anyone? You know, remember the big hammer pants? Man, those were good days. Never owned a pair. But I wanted a pair. Why did nobody wear hammer pants today? Because you didn't want to stick out. You know what? We want to look different. We don't want to wear the exact same that everybody else is wearing. But I would tell you that we want to live within about 15% of what everyone else is doing. A little bit different, but we don't want to go too far out there. There is a safe social zone. And I'm going to tell you, it's the same thing spiritually. There is a subtle opposition that we find in our own souls because we don't want to stick out spiritually beyond what everybody else is doing or feeling. We kind of look around and say, how serious is everybody else taking their faith? How serious is everyone else taking this prayer time? How serious is everyone else taking being in worship together? How serious is everyone taking our worship time? How serious are people taking their faith into the workplace? We don't mind being a little bit different, but we want to be within arm's reach of everybody else, within about 15% of normal for everybody else. That subtle social pressure is an opposition to our faith. I also want you to know that there's the government structure, there's the social structure, We also need to know that there's a supernatural opposition to our faith. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12 tells us this. It says, "For we know that we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." You know, one of the reasons why our spiritual life isn't just rolling downhill, picking up steam, everything falling into place, is because of some spiritual, supernatural opposition in our life. Let me just point out a couple places where I think we see that most often. Number one, I think that Satan whispers lies into our ears. He whispers untruth. He whispers insecurities. He whispers things that are not true. And I think sometimes we are being fed a pack of lies that, as an old preacher said, have the smell of smoke on them. They come straight from the pit of hell. And that is supernatural opposition in your life that is speaking untruth and fear and opposition and falsehood into your life. I would also say that I think there's sometimes when there are strategic moments in your life, really key moments in your life, when things suddenly fall off track. I think it's sometimes the spiritual opposition of darkness. I think sometimes it is though there's a giant game of Jenga. Remember Jenga with the blocks? And you have to pull a piece, and you're trying to pull the pieces that won't collapse the whole thing. I think sometimes the spiritual forces of darkness can come into a church and identify that block that if I just pull or if I just wiggle this block, the whole thing can fall down. I would tell you as pastor, I've watched it happen. Key, critical, strategic moments when the Spirit of God is moving, that the force of darkness wiggles some stupid Jenga piece, and there's the potential for the whole thing to collapse. The opposition that we face in our life is real. There's one more source of opposition. You guys are exhausted by all this, but I'm just telling you the truth. There's one more source of opposition, and that's internal. It's internal. It's our fear. It's our insecurity. It's our love affair with the flesh. It is laziness. It's a whole list of things. But it's not the government's fault. It's not even your friend's fault. Satan doesn't even have to do anything. This is you. Now, if we were to take an honest moment and we think about the opposition that's holding me back spiritually, where do we think that greatest opposition is? Here's the truth. We have a tendency to say, it's the government's fault, it's the structure's fault. When I would tell you, if your life is anything like mine, the biggest opposition that I face in my life comes from within. I can blame all kinds of other folks. I'm good at that. In fact, some of you might have even been blamed this week. Probably not, but maybe so. But the truth is that probably my greatest battlefield is me. It's me. Now, I want you to know that Jesus tells us that his word is going to bring opposition. He says that he will divide families. He says that we can expect pushback because of who he is. You're either in or you're not. And his presence is a dividing presence. And so the disciples shouldn't have been surprised the fact that they found themselves on trial there in that room. They shouldn't be shocked by that at all. But I want you to notice how they respond. I want you to notice the conscious choice that they make. Again, I've already asked you a couple too many questions here today, but has anyone ever been pulled over by a series of blue lights? My favorite thing about being a pastor is that when a pastor is part of a funeral procession, that he follows the blue lights instead of the blue lights following. I love the blue lights in front of me rather than the blue lights behind me. Man, nothing stops your heart quite like those blue lights, do they? They pull you over and like, oh, man. And you're like, can I really say that I wasn't speeding? It's a little questionable. And so here comes our whole hopes. Just give me a warning, please. I hear about people getting warnings all the time. Just a warning. I'm telling you, I won't ever do it again. I just want a warning. And the guy comes or the lady comes and pulls out, do you know that you were driving too fast? Well, that's a possibility. I figured that's why we were talking. And you're just hoping that whole time, please, just give me a warning. Please, just give me a warning. I think I've gotten a warning once in my life. I don't know what it is. Everyone else is getting warnings. I get tickets. But we beg for a warning. The authorities look at Peter and John and say, we're going to give you a warning. Here's the warning. No harm, no foul. Just walk out of this room and don't preach about Jesus anymore. You're not going to be executed. You're not going to be held. Just walk out and don't preach against Jesus, about Jesus anymore. You know, we talk about that opposition, whether it be from your family or your coworkers, whether it be an internal wrestling that happens inside of your life. You know that we have that choice all of the time to say, listen, this is really grinding. This is really hard. But here's your choice. If you walk away, stop talking about Jesus, stop pursuing Jesus, the opposition can go away. You can walk on a warning, and it'll be all over, and it'll be all done. Peter says, hey, that's great. Let me just ask you a theological question, Mr. Sadducee. Are we supposed to obey you, or are we supposed to obey God? Could you help me out with that? I'm trying to figure this one out. And they have this opportunity to walk. They have this opportunity to say, never mind, and never face this opposition again. But they say to those men of authority, say, we have no choice but to speak of the name of Jesus. We have no choice. Their next step is fantastic as well, because what they do next is that they pray a powerful prayer. Now here's the prayer. They gather with all of the other believers. Now that's a big room. We got 3,000 saved in the first section that we looked at. We've got a total of 5,000 men now, not counting how many women are in the room at that time. It's a big room. Peter and John come into them and they say, what happened? How did it go? They say, oh, they were so mean. They were so terrible. They threatened us, and if we're not careful, we're going to face the same thing that Jesus faced. This is terrible. This is terrible. That's not what they said. They told them what happened and said, Jesus told us that we would face opposition. And here is their prayer request. It is not, dear God, make the mean people go away. It is not, dear God, help us to do this more sneaky. It is not, dear God, protect us so that we're never arrested again. Here's their request. God, don't let us stop speaking. In fact, let us speak more boldly than we've ever spoken before. Turn back in to the opposition. Not away from, but back into the opposition. You know that friction and opposition and resistance make our life more difficult. Did you know that? You could write that down. Friction, opposition, and resistance make life more difficult. But at the same time, do you know it is the very things that strengthen us? Now, I know it looks like it, but I don't do a lot of weight training. There's nobody in the room laughing louder than my wife right now. But the whole principle behind that is to, on purpose, recreationally, for your long-term benefit, to find opposition, friction, and resistance. Why? Because it strengthens you. In fact, people lift weights because it defines their body. Muscles get defined. Let me tell you, when we turn back into the face of opposition, our faith becomes defined. If you just roll with the current, you'll stay safely within sight of that 15%. But your faith will not grow. Your faith will not be defined. And you will not be able to stand on the days in which you need to stand. How do we face opposition? Let me give you 3 takeaways. 3 takeaways. The first thing, define the greatest source of the opposition to your faith in your life. What's holding it back? Where's the greatest pushback that you're experiencing? I doubt it's government, but I'm not telling you how to write down your own answer. But it very well could be your social circle. It very well could be sharp opposition from people who are close to you in your life. It could be that subtle social opposition. It could be some spiritual warfare that's going on around you. It could be stuff from the inside. But would you identify and say, okay, where's the pothole? Where's the hardship, the point of the opposition in my life? Would you identify that? Just so you know what you're up against. And then secondly, I would challenge you to bump up against it. I would challenge you to bump up against it. Feel the opposition and don't be intimidated by it. Don't be pushed around by it. Turn into it. Now, don't be ugly about it. Be gracious. Be full of kindness. Be full of joy. Don't call somebody at work a demon, okay? But say, listen, don't be intimidated. Don't be intimidated by it. Turn back into it and face it. And then obviously the last part is to pray for boldness. Pray for boldness. It's kind of hard to ask for just a tiny little bit of boldness. Pray for boldness. Pray for the ability to stand tall, stand strong, stand firm, stand visible, stand unmoved, stand unfrightened, stand unscared in the face of whatever opposition it is that you're facing. Every believer faces some degree of opposition. It does us no good to compare my opposition to your opposition to someone else's opposition. But with the circumstances that you've been assigned, will you stand boldly where God has placed you in the vortex of life that He has placed you? Identify your source. Turn into the opposition and pray for boldness in your life. Let's pray.